Hey everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, and welcome wherever you are in the world today. I know we've got a whole host of people joining us from all around the world. Thank you so much for taking the time out to join us live here today for our Cloud Nexus stream. I'm joined as ever by Benjamin.
Hello.
B Beefcakes, as I like to call him. He's going to kill me, but that's Ben. I'm Scott. I'm the founder of Cloud Nexus, and today we're going to be diving into some more deep dive tech around securing identities with Azure Active Directory, as well as looking at some mobile device management. And we're going to keep it quite light today, aren't we, Ben?
I hope so.
Because
There's lots to get through still.
there is. We did a 2-hour live stream last time, and we got so much great feedback that people said, hey, I'd love you to do more of this stuff. We're doing an hour today, but I feel like we were supposed to trim it down a bit, Ben, and we were supposed to put less content in, but instead we've gone, hey, here's a load of amazing things that we want to share with you guys today, and we're going to cram it in as much as we can. So Kaylee, let's just tell them quickly about the demo tenant that we've got set up. So again, we've got a demo environment here. Everything that you're going to see is us actually doing live configuration inside a Microsoft 365 environment. And hopefully you're going to get some great value and some great learning out of today. So I'm not going to keep waffling. We're just going to jump straight into it. Ben, what are we starting with?
So yeah, we're starting with Azure AD. We're going to look at some of the base concepts around emergency access accounts and roles.
Cool.
So day one, you've got a brand new tenant or you've got an existing tenant. You need an account that is excluded from those policies, a break glass account. So on a type of account you have locked in a safe that no one ever uses on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
It's excluded from MFA, and we're going to factor that in the policies and bits and pieces we start creating today. Quick note on the roles and those bits and pieces as well. So within Azure AD, you have a high number of roles, so you can delegate specific functions. If there's specific job functions, you can delegate those out. We always recommend that because you don't necessarily need global admin for everything. Also, if you're lucky enough to have Azure AD P2, you can use PIM to elevate and things as well. So try and keep that least privilege by default.
Okay.
So we've got our brand new tenant, and we're going to jump into our Azure AD portal here.
Okay.
So we'll just check here. So the first thing we're going to do, not directly related to Azure Active Directory, but we're just going to check our audit log is enabled.
Okay.
So by default, new tenants do have this on, so you'll see it's already enabled on this particular tenant here. However, existing tenants, they might not have it on. So it's just a case of, just wait for that to fire up.
Oh, it's going to get you to log in.
Yeah.
But this is us enabling the unified audit log, basically.
It is, yeah. So we're just double checking that's on. So I will just grab that. So just a simple get command there, and you can see true. So we've already ticked that off. We're happy with that. So any changes we make, anyone else makes, we've got that logged. Specifically, the unified audit log is a general log that includes everything. It's not AD specific, Azure AD specific, where you've got your signing logs, your audit logs there. This is your logs, so you might see SharePoint shared logs and bits and pieces like that when people share files, sensitivity labels. However, as it's more of a general thing, we turn that on for everyone.
Well, certainly an important step, I guess, because it's a basic best practice. First thing, make sure the logging's enabled, so if anything does happen in Azure AD, we're able to see it. And I guess we can also plug Sentinel into that sort of thing later for
exactly, yeah, so we can pull all those bits and pieces out of there, definitely. So we are going to now look at our base security. So we're going to just recap on what security defaults are and how we can effectively enhance security defaults by turning it off and using conditional access. So with security defaults, it's there and it's a mechanism to help protect your tenant. By default, if you're running Azure AD free, we can turn that on within here, within our properties. And wait for that, manage security defaults, and it's a yes or no configuration. If you've got Azure AD P1, you really need to be looking at conditional access because security defaults gives you no control. You can't exclude accounts. It's on or off. And so security defaults include MFA for everyone, your legacy protocols, all those bits and pieces. With Azure AD P1, which we're going to look at next, with conditional access, we basically have so much more control, and you'll see that when we look at that next. So as this is a new tenant, it would be on. We've turned it off just so we can actually get in and configure this, but it will give you a warning that conditional security defaults is turned on if you come to create those conditional access policies. So user testing, properties, turn that off, make sure that's saved, and we're going to jump straight into our conditional access section here. So under security, conditional access. So we can create policies manually and from templates. The templates are really useful, and we're going to base all our policies off that today because why not? Rather than manually clicking, it'll save us a lot of clicks. So we're going to look at identities initially. So we're going to secure that user element. And we're going to go next on that. So we've got a number of policies here. We've got block legacy authentication, which is the one we're going to do first. So all those old protocols, those legacy protocols that don't support multi-factor authentication, pointing out, and I think at some point, I can't remember, it keeps getting pushed back, but Microsoft are rolling that out for everyone. But as a fail-safe, you want to effectively blocking that. I say rolling out for everyone, they're not going to do a conditional access policy for everyone, they're effectively going to turn it off on the protocol level. So that's just something to bear in mind. So what we'll do, we'll block our legacy authentication because we want to ensure we require MFA modern protocols for everyone. So it's a case of clicking on that. Next, it gives you your base policy here. We're applying it to all users and we're going to do block. So create policy, that's the policy done. So you can see how easy that is. At the moment, this is in a report only state. However, we would, when we're ready to go live, just a case of clicking on that, turning that on there and then save. So you can see we've blocked legacy authentication, get my teeth in. So those legacy SMTP, POP, IMAP, all those, and also that includes the ActiveSync as well. Forgot that for a second. So we've done our block legacy authentication. We now want MFA. So we're going to turn that on, and then we're going to require authentications for admins. You can split this up, so Microsoft recommend you do split it up. So this applies to all like the roles, and we'll look at that policy once we've created. However, the fundamental policy behind it is the same. It's that require MFA flag, which we'll look at once we've done that.
And do you still think that's the right way to do it? Like, my view is still always that it's MFA for everyone. Are you saying that you would still implement it as two separate policies, one for admins and one for general users like everyone else? Or would you have the catch-all for everyone?
You can have the catch-all. I think it really depends on the organisation. As a standard, it is quite nice to split it up so you know specifically what's applying. Certainly when it comes to users and guests, you'd split that up because sometimes your guests don't necessarily have MFA. Yeah. And you've got other policies applying to guests, for example, restricting access to only browser only, no downloads, things, bits and pieces like that.
But I guess the key message is whether it's one policy or a couple of policies, everyone's under MFA now. We're not having
exactly.
anyone
So
who
if we
doesn't have
click on this one here, require multi-factor for all users, we'll have a look at this policy and we'll create that policy. You can see how easy that is from actually having to create a policy manually, as you can see here. And whilst you obviously get a lot of options here, you know for a fact that this, if we just jump back there, that base policy will do what it says on the tin effectively. So that's just having a think. So we'll click on that policy here and you can see, we'll just quickly work through it as we wait for it to think. It always slows down when you're trying to use it.
Shall I ask you a question while we're waiting?
Go for it.
Dan's asking, do we generally recommend applying no legacy authentication for everyone, no exceptions, not even a break glass account?
Yes, I would. Yes, now, especially now, because within a couple of months it's going to be off anyway for everyone. Yeah. So definitely recommend maybe gradually roll it out. Don't just turn it on without testing, and then go for that. So
break glass, I mean, it shouldn't be legacy authentication anyway. It should be excluded from MFA for break glass.
Yeah, break glass. Yeah, on MFA, really long password, locked in a safe basically. Yeah. Not even in your key manager either. Your password manager. Ideally, you want to keep it separate so no one can accidentally use it and bypass MFA.
I mean, we literally have that in a safe upstairs. It's a ridiculously long password for a break glass account. So,
some people may have concerns with that, but then you can further restrict that and have a trusted IP. You just need to remember to come from that trusted IP. It really depends on that risk level.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
So jumping into this require MFA policy here, so you can see we've got all our users selected here. Exclusion is one user, and that will be my user I'm using now because I've effectively built that policy, so they've built in those controls to protect you from locking yourself out. You can see it's applying to all cloud ops. We've got no specific conditions selected, however, not really relevant for MFA, but we will look in these more when we get to the device side of things. You can start having device filters, client apps, etc. Whilst we're not configuring any client apps, one thing to point out is Microsoft have changed the way conditional access works. So if you've not got anything selected now, it will default to selected. So previously you had to individually select those applications. So that's just one thing to bear in mind. And we can see our grant control here. I don't know why it's on the slowdown. Just give it a...
It's the Microsoft portal, we know this. It's the Microsoft portal and you're trying to do a live demonstration.
Yeah, it knows.
Whilst you're waiting, do you have time for another question?
Yeah, let's go for
I'll
it.
tell you what, so Mitesh is asking a great question, which does come up. So if you've got an account that we're using for automation or as a service account, should you, and well, can you and should you exclude that from MFA? I mean, I suspect it has to be excluded from MFA, but what are the good ways for us to think about how we can secure it? Do you think?
If any application needs a traditional service account, I wouldn't use the application. You want something that has app registration and is using a secret that you're defining with Azure AD. Try and avoid service accounts. Traditional users use as service accounts, I would recommend. Even with PowerShell now, you can effectively register an application and use that secret to authenticate against Azure AD without having to worry about MFA excluding users and bits and pieces.
Yeah, no, that's a really good approach. Okay, yeah, I like that.
Have we got, let's have a look, see if this is working.
Is it working again? Good stuff.
Having some issues with the portal. Just going to quickly disconnect to reconnect. Won't be a second.
All right, you do that. Dan has said that they actually use Duo for their break glass account. So essentially they've got a separate MFA system for their break glass, which is also a really good approach. Whilst I think about this as well, we talked about this thing in our last live stream where, you know, as MSPs and as IT managers with access to multiple systems, we'll often get used to using password managers, and then people are putting the MFA control inside that same password manager. And for me, that's back to a single factor authentication. If you're using the same password manager to host the password and the MFA control, you've taken multi-factor out of it. You've put it all in one place again. And I don't think that's safe. I think having two separate password managers, having two routes, and I love Dan's suggestion here of having his MFA for his break glass account in a totally separate system makes perfect sense. So definitely have a think about that if that's something that you're doing and managing multiple environments. Keep your MFA tokens away from your main password system. How are you getting on, Ben?
Yeah, my internet is not working that well, so we will have to see how we go. So,
okay, that's the beauty with live events. I will jump down to the next question. Andrew is asking, is there a way to have conditional access apply first because location control doesn't come into effect until after they log in and then it gets blocked? So is there a way of putting priority into those conditional access policies?
No, so that's basically how it works. Yeah, there's no actual way to
influence
block the location before the user's signed in, because that's the logic of the way you have to sign in to basically hit that policy first.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So yeah, that logic flows just the way conditional access works.
And it is, I guess that's true whether we have trusted IP addresses or anything, because they still come under that location control. They've got to try and authenticate with a username, password, or token first, and then it's going to apply those policies.
Then it's going to evaluate, yeah, exactly
Yeah. So unfortunately, Andrew, the answer is no.
Cool. So I'm going to have to connect to somewhere else because my internet isn't working.
Okay.
So
well, I will take the time to just let you guys know whilst Ben's just reconnecting to the internet. So again, live events, what can you do? We are running probably around about 20 to 25 seconds behind live. So do feel free to keep putting questions in. We will try and answer them as we go, but if it's interrupting the flow a bit too much, what we'll do is we'll come back. We've got a whole Q&A section at the end. So please do, pop them in the chat. And if we don't get to them straight away, we will get to them at the end. Today is as good a time as any, I guess, to tell you that, of course, if you like the content that we put out here on the live streams where we're configuring things live, we do have our masterclass tool. And I know I can see from some of the chat, we've got some of our subscribers here, and I'm sure that they would give us a thumbs up for the content that's in there. But our masterclass program is designed for busy IT administrators who need to get in, get an answer to something, and get out and get on with their day. So no long-winded training courses or long-winded videos or anything like that. 5-minute snippets, get in, find the answer to something, get it done, and get out. Ben, are you giving me a thumbs up?
Yeah, we're good to go.
We are good to go. Let's get back to you.
Cool. So yeah, let's jump back into our conditional access policy here. So apologies for that. Cooking with gas. So it wasn't actually Microsoft, it was us this time, on my machine specifically. So let's quickly run through this. So we're applying this to all users. Like we mentioned, the way the logic flows with conditional access, you have to authenticate before the conditional access is evaluated. In reality, it sort of makes sense because when you get to the signing page, you don't necessarily know who is logging in. So we're applying this to all cloud apps. So again, if you need to be specific with applications, certain controls, again, you could be specific on here. However, this is our catch-all MFA policy, so we don't necessarily want to be excluded at this point. Our condition, like we mentioned, we'll touch on these in more detail when we get to the device element. But again, our grant control here is require multi-factor authentication as well. So we will touch on some of these bits as well. So require authentication strength is a new preview feature. So if you guys aren't aware of that, you can basically block the use of what they call legacy MFA-based protocols such as SMS. You can at some point remove push and you want to use the additional context-based methods of MFA, which we'll look at next. So jumping onto that, so we'll just close that and we'll we'll keep that in report-only mode just to save it throwing me out and having to do MFA and slow us down. So we've got that, we've got our base MFA policy. So we want to look at what authentication methods our users are using. So what we'll jump into next is we'll just jump into our security section here and we're going to look at our authentication methods. So you can see we've got our authenticator, which is all users and it's enabled straight away. So that's on by default, so we've left that enabled there. So a couple of new features you may not be aware of. So if you now click into this, you can configure your authentication mode. So you can control whether you can use passwordless or push. We're using any. So passwordless is the ability to log in without a password. So you get a prompt and you have to put a code in, which we'll look at in a screenshot here. So you can see here, when using passwordless authentication, you get information like that. So it'll give you your, basically you have to enter a code rather than a push notification, because there's a lot of chatter on the internet now about MFA fatigue. People are guessing the passwords and it's next, and they'll eventually just approve to get rid of that. The ways to work around that is obviously to monitor your logs. And Admin Droid, I think it is, has a nice report that does a lot of info on that as well. So moving on to that, some of the features that are currently rolling out. So required number matching, show application name, and geographical location. So these are the three elements that Microsoft have introduced to help reduce the MFA fatigue bit. So to jump into that, so you can see here, this is gradually rolling out. However, you can actually turn this on. So at the moment in this tenant it's off. So I can turn all this on, or I can go Microsoft Managed. So Microsoft Managed is they will roll it out as and when they get round to it. But it has started. There was a blog post maybe a month or so ago discussing this. So we're just going to turn this on because we want all this features available now. And they have actually been using it, I think, in thousands of enterprises as well. So we work with a couple of big enterprises that already have this because they've effectively got it turned on their tenant by Microsoft. So again, you can control this to user groups, but I would recommend it's enabled for everyone. And what that looks like, just to jump to a different window, is you will see this. So you'll basically get the location, or you can obviously have the code as well. So you rather than relying on that push, you're getting the ability to do that code typing as well. People might say, well, that's loads, that's too much. Well, turn on passwordless authentication then, and you've got the ability to do that with your phone there. Bear in mind the location is obviously approximate and it's based on the IP address it's been set correctly by obviously the provider, but that's what that looks like. And obviously there's some nice changes that are literally hot off the press in the last couple of months in terms of rolling out. Anyway, they've been there, we've not had them, but you can now jump into your Azure AD portal, like I mentioned, security, authentication methods, and click on there, turn that on. Another nice feature which we often use is the FIDO2 security keys as well. So again, you can turn this on, and what this looks like for the user within when they're signing up and they're adding a method, they can now select user security key. So something like a UB5 key or something like that works really well with Office 365, and you can also use it with Windows Hello as well. Bear in mind that that's the number 5. 4 doesn't work with Windows Hello, so there's some specific caveats on that. So just bear that in mind if you do decide to go down that route.
Is that the YubiKey 5?
YubiKey 5 is an example. Obviously, there's others, but that's the tried and tested one from our point of view.
Yeah. So Andrew actually had a question around YubiKey specifically. So it seems like a great time. He just says, have we seen any issues with using YubiKeys? So the admin logins, restricting admin logins to use YubiKeys, and then using them so that they can get into each portal without any issues. Using that as the MFA factor, basically.
Yeah. So your YubiKey always has to be backed by Authenticator, so you can't add a YubiKey unless you have Authenticator set up. YubiKeys are useful for scenarios where you can't use a phone, for example.
Yeah.
Again, you have to make sure you've staged that key or that authentication method before you get in. The only real issue we see is if people lose it or want to re-add it.
Yeah.
It's treated as re-enroll MFA for the whole user is how you'd manage that, because you don't necessarily have a central portal to manage multiple YubiKeys. The idea is it's users, you lose that, it's gone, we remove it, you have to re-enroll your MFA.
Well, and it's slightly more annoying than that as well, isn't it? Because you have to, you almost have to remove it as the user, as one of their authentication methods.
Yep.
As you said, there isn't really a central portal where you can go and go, right, let me see everybody's YubiKeys, and someone's lost it, so I, as the 365 administrator, can go in and remove their YubiKey for them.
Exactly.
We have to get them to go to the My Sign-ins page as that user and remove their own YubiKey and then add the replacement.
Unless you want to force them to re-enroll of MFA, which is the big red book thingy for within the user. So we'll have a quick look at that.
Which, yeah, it's quite painful. The keys themselves work brilliantly. We've got clients in defense, military contractors where you're not allowed to take mobile phones, cell phones into those environments.
Yeah.
And so them having the YubiKey is a great way for them to be in the right place and get access to their devices. Cool. Okay.
Yeah, so that's myself. Sorry, let's have a look at Adele.
Okay. So whilst you're doing that, the other question that came up is, the location that we showed for the MFA to help with the MFA fatigue. Andrew asks if that's only shown when you're using passwordless authentication, but I don't think it is. It's actually shown for any of those?
It depends. If it's turned on, it will be for any. It'll be once it comes out. Well, if you turn it on manually or when Microsoft turn it on for you, regardless it's getting turned on, that location will appear for both push notifications and passwordless as well. So that's one of the ways they're working around the MFA fatigue bit.
Okay. Okay. Let's get back to your screen and then we can see what you're up to.
Yep, so basically, looking at that point before, we could effectively require re-registry of the multi-factor authentication here, or you can manage some of the methods listed here. These are new experience. I can't remember off the top of my head whether you can literally, you certainly can't add an authenticator or a YubiKey, however you can add email and phones and things and bits and pieces as well. Cool, so let's have another quick look at conditional access just to make sure we've not missed anything. Create a new policy from template, identities. So we've looked at our multi-factor authentication, our block legacy authentication. A lot of these are requiring MFAs for guests. We've got a catch-all here for all users. You can, like we mentioned, split between guests and just plug in device in, there we go. And then we can also split out various roles as well. So for example, we can require MFA for Azure Management here. That is effectively just a separate cloud app. That is covered under our default. However, if you wanted to, you can be more specific. You can force IP management of the Azure portal on your resources from a trusted location. Also, what is quite useful is the requiring a password change for high-risk users. So not necessarily a feature for Business Premium, but something with P2 is if you've got user risk and that user risk is highlighted. For example, you're primary in the UK, you have a user that has a password that's been compromised, MFA is getting hit multiple times in a different country, that user risk would go up, and at that point you can say, right, well, I'm going to require a password change for that user because the logic is there to understand that we know for pretty much sure that that password's been compromised over in Italy, I don't know, for example. So we're going to request a password change for that user at that so-called trusted location. So the one where they've actually done the MFA approval, it'll request that password reset there. So requiring security information registration. So with that one, you can actually require security information from a certain location. That's basically what that policy is for. So you can say, right, you can only fill out your security information at the location. It's quite useful if, for example, basically for that reason, if you need to specifically request that security information is signed up, basically your authentication methods, so your authenticator app, email, SMS, and all those bits and pieces. So I think we'll move on to a couple of other bits and pieces. So what we'll do now, we will just jump into our admin control panel and we'll quickly look at our password policy. So it's recommended now, we've done MRFA, we've blocked legacy authentication. The new recommended approach is not to expire passwords. So in our organisation settings, security and privacy, we've got our password expiration policy here. So basically you want to set your passwords to never expire. This is only valid for cloud only. If you're syncing with Hybrid and Azure AD Connect, it will effectively synchronize the passwords and that will follow that policy. If it expires on premise, they change it, that password will sync. However, if the password expires and the login with 365, that element doesn't sync. So just bear that in mind. It's a bit of a gotcha when it comes to that one. So we've done those few bits. So moving on to our next bit is basically restricting access to the Azure AD portal. So by default, users can browse the Azure AD portal, enumerate what's there, groups and bits and pieces. So we're just going to disable that there. So I'm just going to navigate away from this page because we've gone through those. I'm going to jump to our user settings down here. And basically we're going to restrict access to Azure AD portal here. I'm just going to save that. Nice quick win on that one. We will come back to these app registrations because the eagle-eyed of you will be saying, well, you're allowed in app registrations. We'll come back to that one. So we're just going to jump into our combined registration. So basically the ability to sign up for SSPR and AD Connect from the single pane or the single sign-up process. So if we jump into our properties, oh, no, it's not. It's in our user settings, sorry. And it's in our manage user feature settings. So you'll see that it's actually been removed from this one. You'll see it's listed under here on legacy tenants. Under this tenant, it's been removed, but basically you'll have a tick box here, so it'll be non-selected all. Microsoft will probably finish rolling that out, I would imagine now. If not, if you've got a really old tenant, it would be listed under here as well. So that's just one to call out. So we've done our base settings, we've got all that. We want to allow people to do password resets. So we're just going to jump into that now. Oh, wrong one, sorry. Password reset there, I couldn't see for looking. So at the moment we've got this turned off. We want to turn this on for all. Save. Again, you can roll this out gradually. If you've got AD Connect running and you're synchronizing things, you need to make sure you have password write back configured in AD Connect. We're not going to look at that today because obviously it's a bit more involved, but this is effectively the Azure AD side of things. So we've got our authentication methods here. I always recommend there's at least 2 methods. Bear in mind, you probably want to evaluate these carefully. Email is not necessarily the correct or a useful method because email is a personal email. It's not the email address of the account here. Obviously, the mobile phone as well has the same. It's usually on the same device as the mobile app. So what's quite nice is you've got Office, phone and security questions as well. So you can basically make all these options or 1 or 2 or 3 options available. However, you may want to consider which ones suit your organisation. Email might not be the best.
Can I ask, because tied to that, actually, Andrew asked a question earlier that says, do you recommend allowing users to reset their own passwords, with the concern being that someone else might have access to those recovery methods that we're just talking about
Yeah,
here?
so that's why for password reset we always require 2.
Right.
So if MFA has been compromised somehow, they've stolen the phone, you wouldn't necessarily want email and mobile phone, or mobile push and mobile phone on the same method.
Yeah.
You'd maybe want Office phone and security questions. So you want to try and remove the ability for someone to run off with the device and the phone.
Yeah.
They've got the password somehow and they can do the whole thing and change the password. Or they don't even know the password, in fact, because they can initiate password reset. They've got both methods on the phone.
Exactly.
And they've missed that.
Okay.
So with the security questions, and some people like it, some people don't. You can be specific and you can add your own questions or order predefined questions here, which is quite useful. You can select up to, I think, 20 it is. The users don't have to fill out 20. Basically, they have to register 5, but they have to only answer 3, 4 or 5. So again, that's completely up to you as well.
I love the idea that they have 20 questions.
Yeah, that would be amusing to.
You will not get your password reset.
So yeah, that's the password reset bits and pieces as well. Registration, you can gradually roll this out. You don't have the ability to do a gradual rollout of SSPI unless you're using, any kind of MFA method without using P2. So it's pretty much on or off when it comes to rolling it out for those P1 users, so Business Premium, E3, M365, E3, etc. On-premise integration, if you've got AD Connect up and running, there's a couple of bits and pieces you need here. You basically would have the agent listed there. You'd effectively have to turn that on. That will write back to your domain controller if you've got that basically. You basically have to configure some bits and pieces on premise, such as your password age and bits and pieces as well. But again, that I think is in the masterclass, to be honest. Yeah. So what we'll do is
stop shamelessly plugging masterclass.
Yes.
Quick, Kaylee, stick it on the bottom. There we go.
I hope it is now.
Sorry, just again before we move on, because it is still related. Dan's just asked. So talking about those authentication methods for or recovery methods for MFA, can you block email as a method completely? Is it possible to have options where we don't use email at all?
Well, email's not an MFA method.
Sorry, as a recovery method.
Yeah, so you just don't select it.
Yeah.
So if we just jump back to password reset there, password reset, can't see if looking, authentication methods here, you just untick it. As simple as that.
Okay, so we literally just don't use, we pick alternative methods.
Exactly, yeah. Remove it and don't use it.
Yeah.
So we've turned on our password reset. We've decided to use mobile app and Office phone. Again, you probably definitely want security questions as well. If you're using a mobile app, you want to turn off probably mobile phone. And a lot of organisations don't like people using personal email as well. So basically, ensure that's not selected.
Okay.
Cool. So I'm conscious we're nowhere near the...
You did this last time. You got so excited with what we're talking about that we didn't get through any of the stuff that we had listed. But it's cool because it's all valuable and we're getting great questions.
We're answering the questions as we go. So that's good.
It's all good.
So if we jump up a level and we're just going to go to our user element here, we've got a couple of quick wins. So let's just go to our user settings. Turn off some of these bits and pieces. We don't want users to register applications. We don't want people to synchronize their LinkedIn account connections either because we're mean. So we'll just save that. And we're just going to manage our external collab settings here as well. So by default, anyone in the organization can invite guests, including guests and not admins. We are going to not be too mean. We're only going to allow member users to add users and bits and pieces. We certainly don't want guests being able to invite guests. One interesting setting, which is worth calling out, so you can, if you've got a guest in your organisation, you can actually prevent them from leaving as well. So you can tweak that. We're not going to tweak that, but it's just something to call out there. I find it quite amusing when we look at that. So a couple of quick wins on there. So whilst we've blocked these applications on here, you've got the enterprise apps element as well. So in here, if we click on there, we've got our consent and permissions element here. So we do not want anyone to be able to consent to applications, and we don't want any group owners either. So another couple of quick wins, save on that. And if we just go up a level, oops, sorry.
Just to put those in context, those are those times where they might click on something like Calendly, want to integrate Calendly, and it says, hey, I'm going to need permissions to access your tenant. Is that okay? And there's a tick box at the bottom that says, yeah, I'd like to consent on behalf of the organization. And by default, if I'm right, Ben, if we don't tweak those settings, users can do that and connect into that for the tenant. Now, obviously, they've only got read-only access, but essentially what it's letting third-party applications do is enumerate all the usernames and email addresses inside Active Directory.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, that could be a valid application, but it could equally be a spurious application that they think they're just plugging in. Again, that's just data leakage that we don't want to do.
So just to point on those application requests, so you can actually turn on admin consent requests, so the user can generate a request to the admin. So turn that on, the users or groups. So these two new features, which we've probably not seen since last time. However, we can add our team here, so our admin reviewers. And you can basically, all the defaults are pretty much fine. But when a user gets presented with that new application, they can say, right, request access, click yes. One thing to do, bear in mind this is a brand new tenant. If you're using native mail, which we would never recommend on iOS or Android, that is seen as an enterprise application. It will request access. So As an admin, you've received a request to approve the app. You would literally jump on your admin consent request there. You can see all that listed, and you would literally go ahead and either approve or deny, because we're mean.
We're not mean, we're safe.
Yeah, we're safe.
Safe.
Exactly. We're mean. Cool. So we always recommend we configure some customer branding as well, custom branding. So when a user logs on, they know it's not just a general Office 365 login page. You know what it looks like, and it becomes more familiar. So if someone does start spoofing the 365 login page, you know, well, that's changed, and hopefully it encourages the users to think about that before they log in, I guess. So it's as simple as customer company branding here. You have a default branding. You can have different languages if you want. You have specific requirements on your sign-in pages. Certainly the sizes. If you don't hit these sizes, it won't let you allow you to upload. So we'll quickly do that. Just look at my desktop, and we've got the signing there, and we've got our banner there. So you can see that'll be a nice sign-in page, and we've got our Cloud Nexus branding banner effectively as well. Save that. This does actually take maybe 30 minutes to update in the background. So when you sign into 365, you get presented with that Cloud Nexus branding we've just configured there. So last option. So we've done base config on Azure AD. We've locked it down to a good point. A bit more work needed on conditional access if you needed, but we've blocked those legacy protocols. We've got MFA. We've forced it across the board. We are going to just look at a couple of group governance options as well, because you're aware that when you're creating teams, it obviously creates the groups in the back end. You've got a million group sprawl, I'm going to call it. So we could do a bit of governance on there as well. So we can expire groups here. So if a group lifetime hits a certain number of days, so this is basically if it's not being used, if it hits these number of days, it will delete and then hit that delete cycle.
So can we just clarify used? Because used presumably is, someone sent a message or received a message somewhere in that team.
Yeah, all of the above effectively, yeah.
What about if they've opened a file that's stored inside the SharePoint part of that team? Does that count as being used for the team?
Yes. So as long as because when you, for example, look at SharePoint reports, you get viewed and those bits and pieces in there. So it will actually class it as actually being used.
Okay.
Renewal notifications are sent to the owners of the teams 30 days, 15 days before it goes. And even if it does get deleted, you've got 30 days to restore it from the default retention policies you've got there. If for whatever reason you end up with groups that have no owners, you can configure an email address here, which could typically be your support address or something, which would be configured there. So if there's any issue, you'd get those notifications. So we're going to jump into the endpoint element and configure some bits in there. So let's jump into endpoint.
Whilst you do that, I will say there's a few questions that we've gone past, but I've stored them for now. So what we'll do is we'll come to those in the Q&A section. We'll jump back while you get into the endpoint stuff.
Yeah. So when we're looking at our MDM approach, we have a couple of options. We've got the ability to do MDM for Windows, Mac, and Android and iOS. In this particular session today, we're just going to look at MDM for Windows, and we're going to look at MAM for Android and iOS. So if you're not aware of MAM, it's effectively an application equivalent. You're managing the data and access to those applications on any type of phone, whether that's personal or corporate. And it's really useful. You can do selective data wipes as well, so you can wipe data just from the application on that phone as well. So I'm going to go hit Windows here. So in the Eagle Eye view, if you've come across a tenant, some tenants in Europe have a Linux option listed here. So that Linux option is an accidental rollout by Microsoft, and I just found it interesting. There's something to call out there. It's not in this particular tenant, it is in our Cloud Nexus tenant. However, they are bringing support for Linux to support the Ubuntu desktop OS, which is going to be really useful. It'll allow you to do compliance reports and bits and pieces on that as well, and build that into your conditional access. So we're going to configure our base Windows enrollment here. Really easy to do cloud-based enrollment, automatic enrollment. Turn that on. Whilst you have the ability to apply it to certain groups, this will only take effect here if you're doing an Azure AD join from a Windows machine. So any servers, any hybrid machines, ignore this setting because you don't control the enrolment there, you control that enrolment somewhere else. MAM user scope, that is effectively MAM for Windows, so your Windows information protection. We're not looking at that in today's session because it's a bit of a beast in itself. However, if that's turned on and you have WIP policies, that always takes preference over your MDM if it's a personal machine, so something that's not been staged as an autopilot device or a serial number or something like that. So that's just one thing to bear in mind. If you've got both set, MAM/WIP always takes precedence over the MDM element. Lots of acronyms, can't speak. So we're just going to save that. So now when we do a base Azure AD join, it will auto-enroll into Intune. So you can see that's really easy. We've got our Windows Hello for Business policy here. So we're going to turn this on because we want our secure authentication methods. So we're going to turn that on, and because we had our YubiKeys turned on, we're going to actually allow that here as well. So we're going to turn that on so we can use security keys for Windows sign-on as well. We're not going to go through all these settings, but you can configure pin length, bits and pieces. Require TPM, I always do, but you can obviously be more specific on your pin length and things here. Save that. So we've done our Windows Hello. So we've got enrollment, Windows Hello, and we want our enrollment status page as well. So we've got a default policy, it's assigned. So basically this is one I created earlier, Blue Peter style. So it's basically going to show app and progress for when you're doing that enrollment. So when you turn on a machine effectively out of the box, this is how you would configure that. At the moment, this will only appear or only show to out-of-box based machines. However, you can turn that on, so any enrolment, it will hit the status page and go and install the applications. You can be specific and have different ones. I always find to keep it simple, create one. Never had a real reason for have multiple. So within here as well, you can block the devices until certain applications are installed as well. Again, quite useful if you need to have an AV client on there, which is not Defender. You can configure that to say, right, we need to wait for Sophos or something, for example, before you're going to get access to that machine. So we've got some other new features here. Before we do that though, CNAME validation, you don't have to worry about that because that was a legacy setting. Now, if you do an Azure AD join, it will join Intune based on our automatic enrollment here. If you, just one last bit on that automatic enrollment, if you have hybrid machines and you're doing AD sync, you need to make sure you turn on device sync within AD Connect, and then there's also a group policy setting to turn on, which apply to the machines to then do effectively not necessarily a co-management, but a hybrid join enrollment. Even though I said this isn't related, if this is off, it won't do it. However, turning that on, there's going to be no impact to your hybrid machines. It's literally an Azure AD join.
You know, Dan's just made that comment that I think we've seen before as well, where they said they always leave the Windows Hello for Business screen as not configured, so that it doesn't conflict with one of the other policy settings.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
So that's effectively an overall default policy for everything. However, you can actually set that with configuration policies, just to add to the confusion. Also, if you're trying to disable it, which we wouldn't recommend, is you have to disable it there, and we've also found you have to create another policy to disable it as well. It's one of those. There's multiple ways to skin a cat, but I think as Dan's called out there as well, you've just got to be wary of those conflicts, haven't you? So it's quite right, and you are. It's a good shout, Dan, to say leave it as not configured onto that screen. Exactly that. So we've got co-management settings here. So they're specifically rated if you've got any SCCM bits and pieces. If you need to push out the agent, we don't, so we don't have to worry about that. Autopilot. So we'll quickly look at that. I know we're conscious, worried on time, but we've got deployment profiles. We can create a profile which will allow us to set up a box automatically when you turn it on. So we're going to user-driven Azure AD join. We want to hide. We want all users to be standard. We're going to allow pre-provision. So the pre-provision has been renamed. It was white glove. So the 5 presses of the Windows key to do a pre-stage, then reseal it, hand to the user, they finish it off. Next, assign this to all devices. Next, create. That's autopilot done. Really easy. Obviously, the intelligence with autopilot comes with you packaging your applications, you doing those configuration bits and pieces in the back end in your policies, which we'll look at shortly. So we've done our base Azure AD enrollment bits and pieces. We want to secure our device to a point that we're happy with it. So we're going to jump away from the Windows element into endpoint security, and we're going to look at the use of security baselines. So if we've got security baselines for Windows 10 and later, Edge, Security 365, Windows 365, sorry, should I say. These are policy coming from Microsoft apps as well, so there will be a baseline publishing here soon, not quite sure when, but it has been mentioned. So if we look at this baseline here, you can see I've got one based on the November 21 baseline listed there. You can see here there's loads of lovely settings configured by default. The only change I ever make to this one is allowing the users to elevate, or allow a standard user to elevate so you can do run as, because by default those requests are denied. So you'd want to basically prompt for credentials on a secure desktop. That means you can then run as. Doesn't work through Teams. It does work, however, through the really expensive remote help functionality Microsoft are offering. But obviously it works quite well, but I think in the enterprise version of TeamViewer, I think it works properly as well, the whole secure desktop elevation bit. So if we just jump back up there, we've got our security baseline for Windows. We can do one for Edge as well. As you can see here, we would apply those to our devices. So keep it nice and simple, apply to all devices. So I always recommend when you're building policies is you always have a base security standards. If you need to exclude devices or have different settings, you then have a specific group that has an exclusion. That helps people specifically has to think about it rather than having to remember to add a device to a group. They have to think about adding or how to exclude a device from that setting. So you always know by default when a box is turned on, the user logs in, it's always going to be secure. It's always going to have those applications on. Then someone has to think about how to weaken it effectively. Is that the logic around that? Some people are worried about the security baseline. We use it on loads of customers. There's been very few tweaks to it. One of them, or the main one, being that user elevation bit. As the versions have increased over the last few years, obviously it's become more reliable. When a new version is published, you can actually review the changes it's made. So if we just go up here, we can look at that and change version. We haven't got any new versions, but basically you can either download a CSV to show you the differences. You can accept the baseline but keep my customizations or overwrite everything. So it is quite nice with that. Whilst that's the security baseline, if we just jump back to our device element and click on our Windows section here, we have configuration profiles. So there's two types of configuration profiles. I want to call these out because it's quite important. So you've got settings catalog and templates. Anything new now is a settings catalog. However, templates are still quite useful because you've got loads of nice built-in settings in here you can configure. If you need to build settings catalog is basically, like as it mentions, a massive list of settings you can configure and make your own individual policies. New bits and pieces, for example, the ability to support multi-session hosts on Azure, they only take settings from settings catalogs. Anything excluding that, including security baselines, don't apply to multi-session Windows 10 or 11. So that's very important to call that out. Worth investing that time. If you need to do anything in here, look for the settings in the settings catalog. However, sometimes it's easy if you want to do Wi-Fi certificates and bits and pieces with here. One thing to do call out actually is things like trusted certificates, those bits and pieces there, they are supported on multi-session Windows as well. So it is a bit of a mixture, so you do have to look that up.
Is there a cheat sheet anywhere for that, or
we have a section in Masterclass, again another call out, full section on how to deploy AVD, and we do go through some of the settings that are supported, and we do link that as well.
That wasn't even a plug. I'm
plugging that because yes,
as well. I'm really sorry.
So yeah, we can look at that. So before we look at anything else, we want to look at our conditional access policies for devices. So before we do that, we want to quickly create a device compliance policy. So if we just jump up a level here and we click on our compliance policies here, you can see we've got a list of policies, or we will have a list of policies. So we're going to create a Windows one. So the concept exists for all device types. We're just looking at Windows because it's the most commonly used. Again, we can do MDM on Mac, iOS, etc. So we'll do Windows 10 and later. So again, that's Windows 11 as well. I'm going to create that. Windows, click next. So we're going to skip the custom compliance. You can, however, write your own discovery scripts that look for compliance. We want BitLocker. We want secure boot. We want code integrity. We don't want. We can mention device OS here as well. We don't necessarily worry too much about that. You can do some SCCM bits. However, we do want to require Defender bits and pieces as well. And we want firewall, trusted, TPM, antivirus, and anti-spyware. So we want really base compliance on there. Click next. Before we do that, we're going to make that to 1. So the reason I set that to 1, so it gives your devices 1 day to become compliant. And at that point, it will be in a grace period. However, if it comes compliant before then, it will mark it as compliant. And if it falls back out within that 1 day, it then non-compliant. So next, we're going to apply this to all users. This is misleading, all devices, because if you apply to all devices, it can sometimes apply to the system account, and you can get non-compliance on the system account, and it's not clean. So when you're doing a compliance report, it'll say non-compliant, and it's applied to a system account, which of course it's non-compliant. However, you can only apply compliance policies to devices when you're running AVD in multi-session mode on Windows. So call that out, all users, and we'll click next, and we will create that policy there. So conscious of time, so we'll quickly look at a conditional access policy that uses this compliance policy here. We will jump into our conditional access here, so Azure AD, and we'll look at security and conditional access. So whilst we've set a compliance policy here, we're not doing anything with it until we create a conditional access policy that references device compliance. However, when you apply compliance policy to Windows, if you've got toast notifications enabled, it does randomly pop up and say your device is not compliant. So just bear that in mind when you're rolling that out. Some users may think, well, what's this? So we're going to do a new policy from template because we want to make our life easy. We're going to click on devices. I'm going to go next. So we've got a number of policies here. So we've got our require compliant or hybrid Azure AD join machines for admins. Again, it's irrelevant because we want it for everyone. We've got block access for unknown or unsupported device platforms, not necessarily related to compliance. However, it's useful if a device is hiding its identity. You can block that by default. We're not going to dwell too much on that, but you can basically say we have a no persistent browser. So if someone closes a browser, it's going to re-auth automatically. On that policy, you usually want to exclude things like compliant devices. So you're not constantly forcing them to log in. Require approved apps and app protection. This particular one only applies to iOS. So when you're using MAM on Android and iOS, you want to use this particular policy to force those MAM policies. Require compliance. So this is the policy we want. So we've done our compliance policy. We want to require compliance before we're going to allow you access. So we're going to go ahead and click next, and we will create that policy on here. So we'll jump into that policy here. Whilst it's hybrid, it's still relevant to us because it's using the compliance flag, and basically the control is require one of the controls. So I don't like this policy because it requires MFA there. We've already covered that. So we are saying, right, we'll just select that there. This applies to all users. I always recommend you exclude potentially a global admin account on compliant devices, so you can still get in and manage the tenant. This is usually there for your end users. We're applying to all cloud apps. Again, you can be specific if you need certain apps to apply. Bear in mind, this is going to be applying to users and groups, and you're not excluding any guests. So if you're exposing guests to your applications that are covered under cloud apps, you'll be requiring a compliant device. So bear that in mind, you may have to exclude that. So if we just jump into our conditions here, our device platform is listed here. It's applying to Windows and Mac OS. That's just the way the way this policy, because it's a default policy, is created. We're only interested in Windows because we've only done Windows. However, potentially you may have MDM for macOS in the future, so there's no reason why you can't use that. The concept of hybrid doesn't exist for Mac, so just bear that in mind. So we've done that there, and we've got our grant control, and the device needs to be compliant or it needs to be hybrid joined. However, if it was me and I had hybrid join machines, I'd want them both because I want a hybrid join with device compliance. Because we're fully cloud only, we're just going to require compliant. So device compliance means it will evaluate anything you apply within your compliance section here on that device. So if you've got multiple compliance policies, you won't necessarily, and it fails one of them, it will block access until you become compliant. So that's the big control on there. It's giving you a nice warning on here. You may get prompts on macOS, etc. I love the fact you may, they don't know for themselves. So just bear that in mind if you start, when it's not applying to those particular OSs, because we've filtered Windows in our condition there. Just effectively consider that though if you're pushing this policy out there. So we're going to go ahead and save that policy. So I'm conscious we've only got 5 minutes, so we'll jump to the Q&A, I think.
Cool. Okay, thank you. Genuinely, lots of little light bulb moments I think people are doing on LinkedIn. Lots of claps, and so thanks, Ben. I'm going to go quick. So relevant to what you were just doing with devices, Amit asked, what is the best way to deploy devices using autopilot? He prefers to have the device fully set up and configured so that when the user turns it on, they can start using it. But during that setup process, there are prompts to configure MFA. So how do you work around that? Now, Dan Baird actually jumped in and said they've been using temporary access pass to help with that. What's your suggestion?
So it really depends. If you are doing a pre-provision, also known as what previously known as a white glove, you're effectively resealing that machine. So the machine is effectively set up, you turn it on, it just finishes the user element of the autopilot setup. So if there's any user-specific settings or applications, we always try and persuade people to go down the device element or the device settings route, just so it's quicker for that user log on. The MFA sign-up process, autopilot supports the MFA sign-up process through that wizard, so you could easily use that as well. But also, there's no reason why you can't use the temporary access pass either.
Yeah, I think Amit's trying to, I guess, smooth the bump for that user to get onto the device, get ready, get set, and then maybe just get a more friendly interface to then go through the MFA setup process.
So with just to touch on that, so the MFA sign-up process within Autopilot is exactly the same as any other. Okay. You just can't necessarily manage those methods once you've enrolled. Okay.
So temporary access pass might be a nice way to just get them up and running quickly, but of course the risk is you can get onto that device.
Yeah, and it's more involved for the admin because they have to set up that temporary access, etc.
Yeah, Amit's happy with white glove, so that's a great option. Yeah. Okay, well,
just one point on white glove. If you do set white glove, configure your keyboard within the autopilot settings, or it won't work. Random setting, it took me hours to find. Do not set your keyboard, or the white glove won't work, or / pre-provision.
Oh wow! Okay,
so, top tip.
Great answer. Okay. Let's see. Andrew asks, is there a masterclass video for the additional context settings that we talked about for Microsoft Authenticator?
No, but it's coming soon.
It's coming soon, okay.
Yeah.
Do we limit the number of emails that a user could send to prevent successful phishing from blasting out emails from a compromised account?
So by default, there's value set already. It's quite high. However, we don't usually configure the best practice because we're in fact relying on Microsoft to set that value. It can be tweaked on a per mailbox basis or mailbox policy basis, but we don't have a recommendation for that. We default to Microsoft best practices because ideally they shouldn't be getting phished if you've got safe links and all those bits and pieces turned on. Conscious we've only touched on Azure AD and endpoint. There's loads of other settings we can do, so it's definitely worth another session to look at some of those.
Do we cover, sorry, Amit's just making a point, do we cover white glove in Masterclass?
Yes, so white glove is literally that one setting. So if we just quickly jump back to endpoint here, enroll devices, deployment profiles. So on your deployment profile here, properties, if you have that turned on, it allows you to do the pre-provision. These some specific requirements. So you need to have the latest version of TPM. It has to be an enterprise capable machine. So sometimes, certainly with the latest version of Windows 11 and the requirement for TPM for Windows 11, if you buy a home-based TPM machine, it's not always capable. There's certain bits and pieces you need in that TPM enablement to actually be able to do the white glove. Anything classed as enterprise or business will definitely work. As long as you've got that turned on, anything you've got configured from a a device perspective, when you get to that logon screen, hit your Windows key 5 times. It'll ask you to whether you want to start pre-provision, couple of next, and the device will authenticate based on you pre-staging the device in here. So uploading your CSV, as long as it's pre-staged there, white glove will work out of the box.
Okay.
So effectively the TPM chip is doing that authentication piece in the back end for that enrollment.
I've got it. Okay, 60 seconds, here we go. So for admin requests, how do we handle those going into a ticketing system? Andrew's asked the question, obviously for admin requests, they'd want it rather than going to an admin contact email inside the domain, they'd want it to go to a ticketing system, and normally he's blocking forwarding to outside domains.
Yep, so yeah, the default would be to allow that external forward, but you may want to do that from a transport rule level rather than a forward on a mailbox, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so do a transport rule rather than forward.
Yeah, which is capturing that, because depending on where you've got the settings set, if it's in Exchange transport, remote domain won't work. However, if you're using the AV or anti-spam element of Defender for Office 365, it will probably work, I think, to bypass that.
Okay. Lee Gale says, can we set minimum password requirements?
No.
Because they're set by Microsoft.
They're set by Microsoft, and they're using logic in the back end to actually define whether that's a weak password or a good password. So if it's a password that's been used multiple times, they will effectively know and say you can't set that due to complexity requirements.
Yeah.
So when you do look online for complexity requirements for Azure AD, there isn't a template. However, screw that up if it's hybrid sync and you're synchronizing passwords, because that's your on-premise password policy. Okay. And Andrew also asked, do we recommend setting login hours for workers who don't log in after normal business hours? So if we know there's a set of people that we can put into a group that only work Monday to Friday, 9 till 5, should we have a policy that stops them logging in outside of those hours? So as far as I'm aware, you can't do log-in, log-out hours on Azure AD.
Okay.
These are user voice for that, I think, from memory.
Okay.
However, it's quite old and there's not been many votes on that.
Right.
However, there's nothing stopping you from creating some kind of script which you can run automatically. You could maybe some kind of Azure function or something like that. That is doing some kind of automation to disable those accounts based on some kind of schedule or group membership or something like that. So these ways around that, it's not out of the box that I'm aware of.
But there's certainly an integration that you could do with Azure.
Yes, certainly with Azure functions and bits and pieces, you can do integrations with 365 Azure AD, Exchange. So there's a possible solution there.
That's good thinking. Amit is giving you homework. So 2 videos to be added to Masterclass, forwarding emails to PSA using transport rules, and also a bit more on the white glove side of things.
Definitely, yeah.
Awesome. Guys, I'm going to leave it there because I know we've gone over time, and I'm very conscious of respecting your time. Thank you so much for joining us. What I would say is, if you like this and you like content like this, please do go ahead and check out our masterclass at m365masterclass.com. With it being Cybersecurity Month, we've got 10% off for life using the discount code that you can see on screen. I've loved this. I always love chatting to you, Ben. You're this way, according to the TV. So there we go. I'll pretend you're this way. Thank you again for joining. This has been amazing. I love listening and getting feedback from you guys. Do send us questions or comments. If you want to rewatch this, it's available on YouTube as well. But that's it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time.